Hello, and good evening. I am Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where my voice is still rather deeper than it usually normally is. Perhaps audibly so. I don't know. It sure feels like it. There's like an extra bit of, it's like husky meat. Yeah, exactly. Borf and such. Someone's gonna. No, actually, no. We're not gonna go. We're not gonna pursue that one. There's weird people out there that will absolutely take it the wrong way. Greetings. Hello, everybody. Hi. I'm here with what remains of my voice, and Joey is on my lap because he hasn't had a cuddle all day. He hasn't seen people. He hasn't had attention. He is a sad and lonely boy. And so he's here. Sorry, Llama, hello also. Welcome to you. And hello to Jason Isaacs and to Sherlock Holmes. And also to Foxy as well. I don't want her to feel left out. Hello. Hello to the menagerie. And anyone else's pets. You've all got cats and dogs and other, rats and things like that. Shout out to those too. Hi, how you all doing? So yeah, I don't know. As is normal for me, I was going to say normal for me on a Saturday evening. No, just normal for me. Have no energy. So we're going to see how we get through this one. Perella, thank you very much. Subalerts are good for the health, exactly. As we can see, if we take a look outside the window, you know, it's the cold autumnal weather is moving in. There's rain driving down outside, occasional flashes of lightning and stuff. Which actually reminds me, yeah, I need to do this too. There we go. Your cat has learned a fun new game of pushing things off a shelf you previously didn't realize he could reach, so that's fun. Good. I like that for you and for your cat. That sounds like a great game like from members of the family aged 8 to 88. Great. Have a good time with that. 5 to 55, I guess. Suddenly realizing that I've accidentally picked the wrong numbers to say because they're a dog whistle, even though clearly I'm not, but you know, such is life in the zone. So, how are we all doing? We have the text links at the top of chat. I'm not about to launch straight into the story, but we have the text link at the top of chat. There will be more dodgy Scottish accents. Don't worry. I'm working on it. No one's said mean things about it. So I got complimented last time. So that's nice. Your cat stole your protein shake carton this morning. Oh no! I'm now just picturing like a really buff cat, like holding you upside down, asking you for where the treats are. Yeah, for the treats or where the treats are, or both. Just ripping the door off the cupboard. This might be a little bit of an emotional whiplash from your re-listen to Three Men in the Boat. So I saw you mention that on the Discord, and saying like the thing that came up in it that fascinated me, that almost felt like a fourth wall break in the book, where he mentions as I'll just read out what you posted on Discord. I'm re-listening to Three Men in a Boat, and Jerome is musing over whether their common willow pattern plates will be considered treasure in the 2000s. And yes, they will. I've seen mudlarking videos with people getting super excited about finding little pieces of those plates. Right, like that's when I was reading that. You're right, Joey. And I think I mentioned this in some like after like end of stream discussions and stuff about it. But like that was just really fascinating to me to read a book that is, written long enough ago as to be in the public domain now by an author who, died over 70 years ago. And to have them essentially then be speculating about the future and what will people make of our sort of common artifacts and stuff now. Will they be treated as like historical rarities? And for us here now in the future that he is musing about, to be able to look at that and go, yeah, actually, good spot, well done. That's that's kind of weird and kind of fascinating. As I say, it's not a fourth wall break, but it feels like oh wait, what? Yeah, okay, that's and that's a staggering amount of awareness. Nice one. A swole dog meme except with cat. Yeah, exactly. Just some hench. I'm trying to think of what would be a particularly funny breed of cat to just be extremely buff. I don't know, like a Persian cat or something. Just yeah, ripping the door off its hinges and trying to grab a bag of dreamies. A hairless cat, yeah, like a sphinx or something. Yeah. Cat's trying to drink your tea. Oh no, what kind of tea you got? Mine, he's just, if I put my arm anywhere near him, he is trying to grab it to demand more fuss, which may make reading a little bit difficult this evening, who knows. But he's currently getting some throat scritches, so all is well. Mint and fennel. Ooh, okay. I think I have, like, I have, because if you do anything beyond, if you have any kind of other tea beyond just like standard like black kind of English breakfast tea as we would refer to it, then yes, you've got to have mint. So I obviously have like some loose mint tea. Fennel, kind of thing. I think I have an other tea that has fennel in it as a flavour, but I'm not a fan of that tea. I think that's there. I don't think what actually. I'm trying to think what fennel tastes like. I mean, yeah, I'd give it a try. Why not? I should have actually made myself a green tea before I started today, but I didn't. I chose to instead lie down and shut my eyes for a minute. We'll let the viewers decide which was the wiser course of action. He describes an ugly porcelain dog too, which he thinks people will dig up without its legs and tail, and then consider that a treasure. And that is also very true for some mudlarks. Yeah, I can totally. Yeah, I remember that description, and yeah, I can totally buy that. It's sort of fascinating the things that like, well, it survived from then. So even though to those people it had no value and frankly was, looked down upon by most people because they didn't like it. But due to the fact that it is an artifact from a different time and has survived and has now been literally dug up again, it is interesting and has acquired a value. Worst thing you ever drank was a turmeric tea. So, I have one that is ginger and turmeric, I think. And I wanted to, like, what I think I am partially on a little bit of a quest for a ginger tea that tastes as good as it smells, but doesn't have, like, a real, like, I find that the thing with a number of teas like that is they have, like, a real, like, almost unpleasant, like, back-of-the-throat sweetness. I think there's times that it can come from, like a lot of, I don't know if it's true of other places, but a lot of, like, herbal teas that you get here, specifically if they're the Pucker brand herbal teas, have licorice in them. And it's not listed in the flavours. It's like, oh, it's this and it's this and it's all these other flavours. Oh, okay, cool. And then you look in the back and it's been sweetened with licorice. And I don't like that because that, when I breathe in, gives like a weird sort of sweet, like kind of like a sharp sweetness at the back of the throat. And I'm not a fan. And I've got a feeling the ginger and turmeric one that I have, because I thought, oh yeah, that'll probably be nice, had that same taste at the back of the throat, but I don't remember whether it actually had licorice in it. But I've just, picked up your conversation and decided to make it about my thing instead. That what? Earth was that sound I just heard? And I'm continuing to hear. Is it foxes? Am I hearing foxes? That... I was going to say no, it doesn't sound like a UFO. Because obviously I'm someone that knows what a UFO sounds like. Excellent, well done, you got me. Yeah, probably aliens. No, it's like screeching. Like, kind of distant screeching, but just trying to figure out if it's... I did read War of the Worlds. That it makes me as much of an expert as H.G. Wells was. Yeah, like I'm used to attributing heard a weird screaming sound at night, probably foxes. I have now had reference from Lucy where she's heard other sounds and gone like, oh yeah, that's badgers. So that can be another possibility. Probably less so around here. I think they're a little bit more rural than I am, but certainly there are foxes around. I have photos of them on my phone. So that would be my first guess. But it was somewhere between, like, pig squeals and an owl. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, my first thought was hopefully nothing's got into the chickens. I don't think it would be that because they are shut away. But you once met a very chill fox dead in the centre of London? Yeah, like urban foxes. There's one that just like pops up in the garden. It just sleeps in the garden. If you go outside to try and drive it away, it just sits there and looks at you. Like, hi, can I help you? Like, no, we have chickens around the front, you're not supposed to be here. Like, yeah, okay, alright, fine. If you get close to it, it just backs off into the hedge and just sits there. And then, it just walks back out again as soon as you turn your back. So, yeah, foxes, chill. And to be honest, the one around here looks pretty young. It is not a large fox. It looks pretty new. So, it's like, ooh, tame it, but no. Foxes are very cute, yeah. I agree. No, that's not what you said, but I'm assuming the extension of you love foxes so much is that foxes are cute. Because they is. One time you woke up hearing awful screams, you seriously thought someone in the family was dying, but no, they looked out and saw a couple of badgers chase each other. Ah, yes. Yeah, yeah. But again, it's like, as soon as you have that point of reference, like, oh, it's just that. But until you know what it is and where it's coming from, the imagination fills in a lot of blanks, and there are plenty of blanks to fill in. So anyway, shall we have ourselves a story? Have I done everything I need to do? I am barely with it this evening, so I'm doing my best. Taming means to create ties, according to one of my favourite books, Elton Prince. I've not read that in a long time. But to a point where I don't know I could claim to call it a favourite book, because I haven't read it in, like, over 20 years. But I do remember it being very good, and, it makes sense that it could be, I mean, frankly, a lot of people's favourite books. You hope to buy a house next year in enough countryside to hear weird noises at night that aren't someone's car backfiring? Hell yeah. I hope so for you too. That would be really cool. I'm sad where I used to live. As a kid, I used to have a really, really nice view out the back of the house. Because we lived next to a farm, and had like a low enough hedge that you could just see out over the farm and then just off into Oxfordshire countryside. It was really nice. It was lovely. And then it got sold for development, and they just built a bunch of houses there. So the houses that went there were very expensive houses that sold to wealthy people, and they got a lovely view instead. Definitely not bitter about that. I'm delighted for them. That was cool. But anyway, now that we've, I don't know, whatever the hell we've done, brought up a subject, I'm not sure. I'm going to try and read you some of a story. Do I have enough water? Yeah, I think so. That seems like enough. Right, if we're ready, if we're comfortable. Well, I don't remember where we got to last time. They, oh yeah, another story beat. We learned about, was it the Red Fox? Was that actually the fella's name? After talking about badgers and foxes, I'm like, yeah, the Red Fox. Yeah, exactly, his story. Yeah, we learned about popular figure, the Red Fox. And then immediately David encountered popular figure, the Red Fox. And then, oops, whoops, happened to be stood right next to him as someone shot him. Because it turns out, no, the popularity was a myth and a lie and a ruse. I misled you, sorry. He is actually extremely unpopular to half of Scotland, which would be the oppressed half. Because he was like good pals with King George and was sort of working to undermine and sell out Scotland. And the people who are being undermined and sold out and, you know, want to wear their family tartan, took offence, took a dislike to this. And so someone shot him. We don't know who. And seeing his entourage who were with him, on seeing David stood there by the side of the road, kind of, he just like popped out for a conversation. They're like, oh, you're an accomplice. No, I'm not. This is just bad timing. Well, too bad. We would like to take you into prison and kill you. And David ran. So, well, that's not the exact sequence of events. He was kind of off and chasing, because, you know, David has, should we say, an extremely strong moral compass. And, you know, he saw this, frankly, detestable figure get shot and was like, no, crime's been committed, there's been a murder, I'm going to chase down the man that shot him. And then they're like, well, we just take this kid in instead. And so he just kept on running. And then in kind of the process of running, bumped into and sort of mess up again with Alan Breck, who has been helping him, putting himself at risk to help David, who has been putting himself at risk to help Alan. And together they escaped, and I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. Oh yeah, they stopped off at a house, at like the sort of the house of one of Alan's friends, who was I think sort of a respected, notable figure, and there, so as to avoid bringing yet further trouble down upon basically the rest of Scotland. The Alan's friends agreed, or kind of sought permission of, and the agreement that it would be okay to basically stick a bounty on Alan and David's heads, so that the English didn't then go, well, you're obviously harbouring fugitives, so we're going to take you all into prison instead, and you will probably die. So Alan and David were like, yeah, I guess, okay, you can put a bounty on us too. Oh, Manson, hello, welcome in. I'm just attempting to recap the story from a couple of weeks ago, but doing a, frankly, you know, mediocre, unenthusiastic job of it. I'm sorry. You've been listening along. You know where we're at. I am going to pick up from here and carry on. So, if we are all ready, we are at a perfectly adequate job. Well, thank you. I try. We are at chapter 20. I need to 22. No, XX is 20 because X is 10. That's how Roman numerals work. I am just a peek inside my skull. It seems that my thoughts are throwing every single wrong word into the sentence, and I'm having to carefully identify and step around each one that is being thrown in the way. Otherwise, I would just be talking pure nonsense with absolute conviction, like a guy on a podcast. So, you know, that's how my brain is doing this evening. It is trying to trip me up at every turn. So it's probably best if I just read the words written on a book rather than try to come up with my own. So, If we are ready, and all in our places, then let us carry on with Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 20. The Flight in the Heather. The Rocks. Sometimes we walked, sometimes ran, and as it drew on to morning, walked ever the less and ran the more. Though, upon its face, that country appeared to be a desert, yet there were huts and houses of the people, of which we must have passed more than 20, hidden in quiet places of the hills. When we came to one of these, Alan would leave me in the way, and go himself and rap upon the side of the house and speak a while at the window with some sleeper awakened. This was to pass the news, which, in that country, was so much of a duty that Alan must pause to attend to it even while fleeing for his life, and so well attended to by others that in more than half of the houses where we called they had heard already of the murder. In the others, as well as I could make out, standing back at a distance and hearing a strange tongue, the news was received with more of consternation than surprise. For all our hurry, day began to come in while we were still far from any shelter. It found us in a prodigious valley, strewn with rocks, and where ran a foaming river. Wild mountains stood around it. There grew there neither grass nor trees, and I have sometimes thought since then that it may have been the valley called Glencoe, where the massacre was in the time of King William. But for the details of our itinerary, I am all to seek. Our way lying now by shortcuts, now by great detours, our pace being so hurried, our time of journeying usually by night, and the names of such places as I asked and heard being in the Gaelic tongue and the more easily forgotten. The first peep of morning, then, showed us this horrible place, and I could see Alan knit his brow. "This is no fit place for you and me," he said. "This is a place they're bound to watch." And with that, he ran harder than ever down to the waterside, in a part where the river was split in two among 3 rocks. It went through with a horrid thundering that made my belly quake, and there hung over the linn a little mist of spray. Alan looked neither to the right nor to the left, but jumped clean upon the middle rock, and fell there on his hands and knees to check himself, for that rock was small and he might have pitched over on the far side. I had scarce time to measure the distance or to understand the peril before I had followed him, and he caught and stopped me. So there we stood, side by side upon a small rock slippery with spray, a far broader leap in front of us, and the river dinning upon all sides. When I saw where I was, there came on me a deadly sickness of fear, and I put my hand over my eyes. Alan took me and shook me. I saw he was speaking, but the roaring of the falls and the trouble of my mind prevented me from hearing. Only I saw his face was red with anger, and that he stamped upon the rock. The same look showed me the water raging by, and the mist hanging in the air, and with that I covered my eyes again and shuddered. The next minute, Alan had set the brandy bottle to my lips and forced me to drink about a gill, which sent the blood into my head again. Then, putting his hands to his mouth and his mouth to my ear, he shouted, "Hang or drown!" and turning his back upon me, leaped over the farther branch of the stream and landed safe. I was now alone upon the rock, which gave me the more room. The brandy was singing in my ears. I had this good example fresh before me, and just wit enough to see that if I did not leap at once, I should never leap at all. I bent low on my knees and flung myself forth with that kind of anger of despair that has sometimes stood me instead of courage. Sure enough, it was but my hands that reached the full length. These slipped, caught again, slipped again, and I was slithering back into the linn when Alan seized me, first by the hair, then by the collar, and with a great strain dragged me into safety. Never a word, he said, but set off running again for his life, and I must stagger to my feet and run after him. I had been weary before, but now I was sick and bruised and partly drunken with the brandy. I kept stumbling as I ran. I had a stitch that came near to overmaster me, when at last Alan paused under a great rock and stood there among a number of others, and it was none too soon for David Balfour. A great rock, I have said, but by rights it was 2 rocks, leaning together at the top, both some 20 feet high, and at the first sight inaccessible. Even Alan, though you may say he had as good as 4 hands, failed twice in an attempt to climb them, and it was only at the 3rd trial, and then by standing on my shoulders and leaping up with such force as I thought must have broken my collarbone, that he secured a lodgment. Once there, he set down his leathern girdle, and with the aid of that and a pair of shallow footholds on the rock, I scrambled up beside him. Then I saw why he had come there, for the 2 rocks, being both somewhat hollow in the top and sloping one to the other, made a kind of dish or saucer, where as many as 3 or 4 men might have lain hidden. All this while Alan had said not a word, and had run and climbed with such a savage, silent frenzy of hurry, that I knew he was in mortal fear of some miscarriage. Even now we were on the rock, he said nothing, nor so much as relaxed the frowning look upon his face, but clapped flat down, and keeping only one eye above the edge of our place of shelter, scouted all round the compass. The dawn had come quite clear. We could see the stony sides of the valley, and its bottom, which was bestrewed with rocks, and the river, which went from one side to another, and made white falls. But nowhere the smoke of a house, nor any living creature but some eagles screaming round a cliff. Then, at last, Alan smiled. "Aye," said he, "now we have a chance." And then, looking at me with some amusement, "You're no very glad at the jumping," said he. At this, I suppose I coloured with mortification, for he added at once, "Hoot, small blame to you. To be feared of a thing and yet to do it is what makes the prettiest kind of a man. And then there was water there, and water's a thing that dauntens even me." No, said Alan. "It's no you that's to blame, it's me." I asked him why. "Why," said he, "I've proved myself a gomeril this night. But first of all I take a wrong road, and that in my own country of Appin, so that the day has caught us where we should never have been. And, thanks to that, we lie here in some danger and mere discomfort. And next, which is the worst of the 2 for a man that has been so much among the heather as myself, I've come wanting a water bottle, and here we lie for a long summer's day with naething but neat spirit. You may think that small matter, but before it comes night, David, you'll give me news of it." I was anxious to redeem my character, and offered, if he would pour out the brandy, to run down and fill the bottle at the river. "I wouldn't wish a good spirit either," says he. "I've been a good friend to you this night, or in my poor opinion, you'd still be cocking on yon stone. And what's more," says he, "you may have observed, you that's a man of so much penetration, that Alan Breck Stewart was perhaps walking quicker than his ordinary." "You?" I cried. "You were running fit to burst." "Was I so?" said he. "Well, then, you may depend upon it there was no time to be lost. And now here is enough said. Go and get to your sleep, lad, and I'll watch." Accordingly, I lay down to sleep. A little peaty earth had drifted in between the top of the 2 rocks, and some bracken grew there, to be a bed to me. The last thing I heard was still the crying of the eagles. I dare say it would be 9 in the morning when I was roughly awakened and found Alan's hand pressed upon my mouth. "Wheesht," he whispered. "You were snoring." "Well?" said I, surprised at his anxious and dark face. And why not? He peered over the edge of the rock and signed to me to do the like. It was now high day, cloudless and very hot. The valley was as clear as in a picture. About half a mile up the water was a camp of red coats. A big fire blazed in their midst, at which some were cooking. And nearby, on the top of a rock about as high as ours, there stood a sentry, with the sun sparkling on his arms. All the way down along the riverside were posted other sentries. Here, near together, there, widely scattered, some planted like the first, on places of command, some on the ground level and marching and counter-marching, so as to meet halfway. Higher up the glen, where the ground was more open, the chain of posts was continued by horse soldiers, whom we could see in the distance riding to and fro. Lower down, the infantry continued, but as the stream was suddenly swelled by the confluence of a considerable burn, they were more widely set, and only watched the fords and stepping stone. I took but one look at them, and ducked again into my place. It was strange, indeed, to see this valley, which had lain so solitary in the hours of dawn, bristling with arms and dotted with the red coats and breeches. "You see," said Alan, "this was what I feared of, Davy, that they would watch the burnside. They began to come in about 2 hours ago, and man, but they're a grand hand at the sleeping. You're a grand hand at the sleeping. We're in a narrow place. If they get up the sides of the hill, they could easily spy us with a glass, but if they're only keeping their foot of the valley, we'll do yet. The posts are thinner down the water, and come night we'll try our hand at getting by them." "And what are we to do till night?" I asked. "Lie here," says he, "and burstle. That one good Scotch word, burstle, was indeed the most of the story of the day that we had now to pass. You are to remember that we lay on the bare top of a rock, like scones upon a girdle. The sun beat upon us cruelly. The rock grew so heated a man could scarce endure the touch of it, and the little patch of earth and fern, which kept cooler, was only large enough for one at a time. We took turn about to lie on the naked rock, which was indeed like the position of that saint that was martyred on a gridiron, and it ran in my mind how strange it was that in the same climate and at only a few days' distance I should have suffered so cruelly, first from cold upon my island, and now from heat upon this rock. All the while we had no water, only raw brandy for a drink, which was worse than nothing. But we kept the bottle as cool as we could, burying it in the earth, and got some relief by bathing our breasts and temples. The soldiers kept stirring all day in the bottom of the valley, now changing guard, now in patrolling parties hunting among the rocks. These lay round in so great a number that to look for men among them was like looking for a needle in a bottle of hay. And being so hopeless a task, it was gone about with the less care. Yet we could see the soldiers pike their bayonets among the heather, which sent a cold thrill into my vitals, and they would sometimes hang about our rock, so that we scarce dared to breathe. It was in this way that I first heard the right English speech. One fellow, as he went by, actually clapping his hand upon the sunny face of the rock on which we lay, and plucking it off again with an oath. "I tell you it's hot," says he, and I was amazed at the clipping tones and the odd sing-song in which he spoke, and no less at that strange trick of dropping out the letter H. To be sure, I had heard Ransom, but he had taken his ways from all sorts of people, and spoke so imperfectly at the best, that I set down the most of it to childishness. My surprise was all the greater to hear that manner of speaking in the mouth of a grown man, and indeed I have never grown used to it, nor yet altogether with the English grammar, as perhaps a very critical eye might here and there spy out, even in these memoirs. The tediousness and pain of these hours upon the rock grew only the greater as the day went on, the rock getting still the hotter and the sun fiercer. There were giddiness and sickness and sharp pangs like rheumatism to be supported. I minded then, and have often minded since, on the lines in our Scotch psalm: "The moon by night thee shall not smite, nor yet the sun by day." And indeed it was only by God's blessing that we were neither of us sun-smitten. At last, about 2, it was beyond men's bearing, and there was now temptation to resist, as well as pain to thole. For the sun being now got a little into the west, there came a patch of shade on the east side of our rock, which was the side sheltered from the soldiers. "As well one death as another," said Alan, and slipped over the edge and dropped onto the ground on the shadowy side. I followed him at once, and instantly fell all my length, so weak was I and so giddy with that long exposure. Here, then, we lay for an hour or two, aching from head to foot, as weak as water, and lying quite naked to the eye of any soldier who should have strolled that way. None came, however, all passing by on the other side, so that our rock continued to be our shield, even in this new position. Presently, we began again to get a little strength, and as the soldiers were now lying closer along the riverside, Alan proposed that we should try a start. I was by this time afraid of but one thing in the world, and that was to be set back upon the rock. Anything else was welcome to me, so we got ourselves at once in marching order and began to slip from rock to rock one after the other, now crawling flat on our bellies in the shade, now making a run for it, heart in mouth. The soldiers, having searched this side of the valley after a fashion, and being perhaps somewhat sleepy with the sultriness of the afternoon, had now laid by much of their vigilance, and stood dozing at their posts, or only kept a lookout along the banks of the river, so that in this way, keeping down the valley and at the same time towards the mountains, we drew steadily away from their neighbourhood. But the business was the most wearing I had ever taken part in. A man had need of 100 eyes in every part of him, to keep concealed in that uneven country and within cry of so many and scattered sentries. When we must pass an open place, quickness was not all, but a swift judgment not only of the lie of the whole country, but of the solidity of every stone on which we must set foot. For the afternoon was now fallen so breathless that the rolling of a pebble sounded abroad like a pistol shot, and would start the echo calling among the hills and cliffs. By sundown we had made some distance, even by our slow rate of progress, though to be sure the sentry on the rock was still plainly in our view. But now we came on something that put all fears out of season, and that was a deep rushing burn that tore down in that part to join the Glen River. At the sight of this, we cast ourselves on the ground and plunged head and shoulders in the water, and I cannot tell which was the more pleasant, the great shock as the cool stream went over us, or the greed with which we drank of it. We lay there, for the banks hid us, drank again and again, bathed our chests, let our wrists trail in the running water till they ached with the chill, and at last, being wonderfully renewed, we got out the meal bag and made drammach in the iron pan. This, though it is but cold water mingled with oatmeal, yet makes a good enough dish for a hungry man, and where there are no means of making fire, or, as in our case, good reason for not making one, it is the chief stand-by of those who have taken to the heather. As soon as the shadow of the night had fallen, we set forth again, at first with the same caution, but presently with more boldness, standing our full height and stepping out a good pace of walking. The way was very intricate, Lying up the steep sides of mountains and along the brows of cliffs, clouds had come in with the sunset, and the night was dark and cool, so that I walked without much fatigue, but in continual fear of falling and rolling down the mountains, and with no guess at our direction. The moon rose at last, and found us still on the road. It was in its last quarter, and was long beset with clouds, but after a while shone out, and showed me many dark heads of mountains, and was reflected far underneath us on the narrow arm of a sea loch. At this sight we both paused. I struck with wonder to find myself so high and walking, as it seemed to me, upon clouds, Alan to make sure of his direction. Seemingly he was well pleased, and he must certainly have judged us out of earshot of all our enemies, for throughout the rest of our night march he beguiled the way with whistling of many tunes, warlike, merry, plaintive, real tunes that made the foot go faster, tunes of my own south country that made me fain to be home from my adventures, and all these on the great, dark desert mountains, making company upon the way. Chapter 21. The Flight in the Heather. The Hue of Corinakai. Early as day comes in the beginning of July, it was still dark when we reached our destination, a cleft in the head of a great mountain, with the water running through the midst, and upon the one hand a shallow cave in a rock. Birches grew there in a thin, pretty wood, which, a little further on, was changed into a wood of pines. The burn was full of trout, the wood of cushat doves. On the open side of the mountain beyond wops would be always whistling, and cuckoos were plentiful. From the mouth of the cleft we looked down upon a part of Mamor, on the sea loch that divides the country from Appin, and from this so great a height as made it my continual wonder and pleasure to sit and behold them. The name of the cleft was the Hue of Corinakai, and although from its height and being so near upon the sea, it was often beset with clouds, yet it was on the whole a pleasant place, and the 5 days we lived in it went happily. We slept in the cave, making our bed of heather bushes, which we cut for that purpose, and covering ourselves with Alan's great coat. There was a low, concealed place, in a turning of the glen, where we were so bold as to make fire, so that we could warm ourselves when the clouds set in, and cook hot porridge, and grill the little trouts that we caught with our hands under the stones and overhanging banks of the burn. This was indeed our chief pleasure and business, and not only to save our meal against worse times, but with a rivalry that much amused us, we spent a great part of our days at the waterside, stripped to the waist and groping about, or, as they say, guddling for these fish. The largest we got might have been 1/4 pound, but they were good flesh and flavour, and when broiled upon the coals lacked only a little salt to be delicious. In any by-time, Alan must teach me to use my sword, for my ignorance had much distressed him, and I think, besides, as I had sometimes the upper hand of him in the fishing, he was not sorry to turn to an exercise where he had so much the upper hand of me. He made it somewhat more of a pain than need have been, for he stormed at me all through the lessons in a very violent manner of scolding, and would push me so close that I made sure he must run me through the body. I was often tempted to turn tail, but held my ground for all that, and got some profit of my lessons, if it was but to stand on guard with an assured countenance, which is often all that is required. So, though I could never in the least please my master, I was not altogether displeased with myself. In the meanwhile, you are not to suppose that we neglected our chief business, which was to get away. "That will be many a long day," Alan said to me on our first morning, before the redcoats think upon seeking Colin Mackay. So now we must get word sent to James, and he must find the cellar for us." "And how will we send that word?" says I. "We are here in a desert place, which yet we dare not leave. And unless ye get the fowls to be the heir of your messengers, I see not what we shall be able to do." "Aye," said Alan, "you're a man of small contrivance, David." Thereupon he fell in a muse, looking in the embers of the fire, and presently, getting a piece of wood, he fashioned it in a cross, the 4 ends of which he blackened on the coals. Then he looked at me a little shyly. "Could ye lend me my button?" says he. "It seems a strange thing to ask a gift again, but I own I am loath to cut another." I gave him the button, whereupon he strung it on a strip of his great coat, which he had used to bind the cross, and tying in a little sprig of birch and another of fir, he looked upon his work with satisfaction. "Now," said he, "there is a little clachan," what is called a hamlet in the English, not very far from Corrynakai, and it has the name of, excuse me 1 second, Coalasnacoon. There are living many friends of mine whom I could trust with my life, and some that I am no so sure of. You see, David, there will be money set upon our heads. James himself has set money on them. And as for the Campbells, they would never spare siller where there was a Stuart to be hurt. If it was otherwise, I'd go down to Coalasnacoon and whatever, and trust my life into these people's hands as lightly as I would trust another with my glove." "But being so," said I. "Being so," said he, "I were as lief they didn't see me. There's bad folk everywhere, and what's far worse, weak ones. So when it comes dark again, I will steal down into that clachan, and set this that I've been making in the window of a good friend of mine, John Breck McCall, a bowman of Appins." "With all my heart," says I, "and if he finds it, what's he to think?" "Well," says Alan, "I wish he was a man of more penetration, for by my troth I'm afraid he will make little enough of it. But this is what I have in my mind. The cross is something in the nature of the cross tarry or fiery cross, which is the signal of gathering in our clans. Yet he will know well enough the clan is not to rise, for there it is standing in his window and no word with it. So he will say to himself, the clan is not to rise, but there is something. Then he will see my button, and that was Duncan Stewart's, and he will say to himself, the son of Duncan is in the heather, and has need of me." "Well," said I, "that may be. But even supposing so, there is a good deal of heather between here and the Forth." "That is a very true word," says Alan. "But then John Breck will see the sprig of birch and the sprig of pine, and he'll say to himself, if he is a man of any penetration at all, which I misdoubt, Alan will be lying in a wood which is both of pines and birches. Then he will think to himself, that is not so very rife hereabout, and then he will come and give us a look up in Corrynakai, and if he does not, David, the devil may fly away with him for what I care, for he will be no worth, but he will no be worth the salt to his porridge." "Eh, man," said I, drolling with him a little, "you're very ingenious. But would it not be simpler for you to write him a few words in black and white?" "And that is an excellent observe, Mr. Balfour Shaws," says Alan, drolling with me, "and it would certainly be much simpler for me to write to him, but it would be a sore job for John Breck to read it. He would have to go to the school for 2-3 years, and it's possible we might be worried waiting on him." So that night, Alan carried down his fiery cross and set it in the bowman's window. He was troubled when he came back, for the dogs had barked and the folk run out from their houses, and he thought he had heard a clatter of arms and seen a redcoat come to one of the doors. On all accounts, we lay the next day in the borders of the wood and kept a close lookout, so that if it was John Breck that came, we might be ready to guide him, and if it was the redcoats, we should have time to get away. About noon, a man was to be spied straggling up the open side of the mountain in the sun, and looking round him as he came from under his hand. No sooner had Alan seen him than he whistled. The man turned and came a little towards us. Then Alan would give another peep, and the man would come still nearer, and so by the sound of whistling he was guided to the spot where we lay. He was a ragged, wild, bearded man about 40, grossly disfigured with the smallpox, and looks both dull and savage. Although his English was very bad and broken, yet Alan, according to his very handsome use whenever I was by, would suffer him to speak no Gaelic. Perhaps the strange language made him appear more backward than he really was, but I thought he had little good will to serve us, and what he had was the child of terror. Alan would have had him carry a message to James, but the bowman would hear of no message. "Just forget it," he said in his screaming voice, and would either have a letter or wash his hands of us. I thought Alan would be gravelled at that, for we lacked the means of writing in that desert. But he was a man of more resources than I knew, searched the wood until he found a quill of a cushat dove, which he shaped into a pen, made himself a kind of ink with gunpowder from his horn and water from the running stream, and tearing a corner from his French military commission, which he carried in his pocket like a talisman to keep him from the gallows, he sat down and wrote as follows: "Dear kinsman, please send the money by the bearer to the place he kens of. Your affectionate cousin, A.S." This he entrusted to the bowman, who promised to make what manner of speed he best could, and carried it off with him down the hill. He was 3 full days gone, but about 5 in the evening of the 3rd we heard a whistling in the wood, which Alan answered, and presently the bowman came up the waterside, looking for us right and left. He seemed less sulky than before, and indeed he was no doubt well pleased to have got to the end of such a dangerous commission. He gave us the news of the country, that it was alive with redcoats, that arms were being found, and poor folk brought in trouble daily, and that James with some of his servants were already clapped in prison at Fort William under strong suspicion of complicity. It seemed it was noised on all sides that Alan Breck had fired the shot, and there was a bill issued for both him and me, with £100 reward. This was all as bad as could be, and the little note the bowman had carried us from Mrs. Stewart was of a miserable sadness. In it she besought Alan not to let himself be captured, assuring him, if he fell into the hands of the troops, both he and James were no better than dead men. The money she had sent was all that she could beg or borrow, and she prayed heaven we could be doing with it. Lastly, she said she enclosed us one of the bills in which we were described. This we looked upon with great curiosity and not a little fear, partly as a man may look in a mirror, partly as he might look into the barrel of an enemy's gun to judge if it be truly aimed. Alan was advertised as a small, pock-marked, active man of 35 or thereby, dressed in a feathered hat, a French side coat of blue with silver buttons and lace, a great deal tarnished, a red waistcoat and breeches of black shag, and I as a tall, strong lad of about 18, wearing an old blue coat, very ragged, an old Highland bonnet, a long homespun waistcoat, blue breeches, his legs bare, low country shoes, wanting the toes, speaks like a lowlander, and has no beard. Alan was well enough pleased to see his finery so fully remembered and set down, only when he came to the word tarnish he looked upon his lace like one a little mortified. As for myself, I thought I cut a miserable figure in the bill, and yet was well enough pleased too, for since I had changed these rags the description had ceased to be a danger and became a source of safety. "Alan," said I, "you should change your clothes." "Na troth," said Alan, "I have nae others. A fine sight I would be if I went back to France in a bonnet." This put a second reflection in my mind, that if I were to be separate from Alan and his telltale clothes, I should be safe against arrest, and might go openly about my business. Nor was this all. For suppose I was arrested when I was alone, there was little against me. But suppose I was taken in company with the reputed murderer, my case would begin to be grave. For generosity's sake, I dare not speak my mind upon this head, but I thought of it none the less. I thought of it all the more, too, when the bowman brought out a green purse with 4 guineas in gold, and the best part of another in small change. True, it was more than I had, but then Alan, with less than 5 guineas, had to get as far as France. I, with my less than 2, not beyond Queensferry. So that, taking things in their proportion, Alan's society was not only a peril to my life, but a burden on my purse. But there was no thought of the sort in the honest head of my companion. He believed he was serving, helping, and protecting me. And what could I do but hold my peace and chafe and take my chance of it? "That's little enough," said Alan, putting the purse in his pocket, "but that'll do my business. And now, John Breck, if you'll hand me over my button, this gentleman and me will be for taking the road." But the bowman, after feeling about in a hairy purse that hung in front of him in the Highland manner, though he wore otherwise the lowland habit with sea trousers, began to roll his eyes strangely, and at last said, "An inso will loss it," meaning he thought he had lost it. "What?" cried Alan. "You will lose my button. That was my father's before me. Now, I will tell you what is in my mind, John Breck. It is in my mind that this is the worst day's work that ever you did since you were born." And as Alan spoke, he set his hands on his knees and looked at the bowman with a smiling mouth and the dancing light in his eyes that meant mischief to his enemies. Perhaps the bowman was honest enough. Perhaps he had meant to cheat, and then, finding himself alone with 2 of us in a desert place, cast back to honesty as being safer. At least, and all at once, he seemed to find that button and handed it to Alan. "Well, and it's a good thing for the honour of the McCalls," said Alan, and then to me, "Here's my button back again, and I thank you for parting with it, which is of a piece with all your friendships to me." Then he took the warmest parting of the bowman. "For," says he, "you have done very well by me and set your neck at a venture, and I will always give you the name of a good man." Lastly, the bowman took himself off by one way, and Alan and I, getting our chattels together, struck into another to resume our flight. Checking where I am. Let's do another chapter. Chapter 22. The Flight in the Heather. The Moor. More than 11 hours of incessant, hard travelling brought us early in the morning to the end of a range of mountains. In front of us there lay a piece of low, broken desert land which we must now cross. The sun was not long up, and shone straight in our eyes. A little thin mist went up from the face of the moorland like a smoke, so that, as Alan said, there might have been 20 squadron of dragoons there, and we none the wiser. We sat down, therefore, in a howe of a hillside till the mist should have risen, and made ourselves a dish of drammach, and held a council of war. "David," said Alan, "this is the kittle bit. Shall we lie here again till it comes night, or shall we risk it and stave on ahead?" "Well," said I am tired indeed, but I could walk as far again, if that was all." "Aye, but it isna," said Alan, "nor yet the half. This is how we stand. Appin's fair death to us. To the south it's all Campbells, and no to be thought of. To the north, well, there's no muckle to be gained by going north. Neither for you that wants to get at Queensferry, nor yet for me that wants to get to France. Well then, we can strike east." "East be it," says I, quite cheerily. But I was thinking into myself, "Oh man, if you would only take the one point of the compass and let me take the other, it would be the best for both of us." Well then, east, you see, we have the moors, said Alan. Once there, David, it's mere pitch and toss. Out on yon bald, naked, flat place, where can a body turn to? Let the redcoats come over the hill, I can spy you miles away, and the sorrows in their horses' heels, they'll soon ride you down. It's no good place, David, and I'm free to say it's worse by daylight than by dark. Alan, said I, hear my way of it. Happens death for us. We have none too much money, nor yet meal. The longer they seek, the nearer they may guess where we are. It's all a risk, and I give my word to go ahead until we drop. Alan was delighted. There are whiles, said he, when you're altogether too canny and Whiggish to be company for a gentleman like me, but there are other whiles when you show yourself a metal spark, and it's then, David, that I love you like a brother. The mist rose and died away, and showed us that country lying as waste as the sea, only the moorfowl and the peewees crying upon it, and far over to the east a herd of deer moving like dots. Much of it was red with heather, much of the rest broken up with bogs and hags and peaty pools. Some had been burnt black in a heath fire, and in another place there was quite a forest of dead firs standing like skeletons. A wearier-looking desert man never saw, but at least it was clear of troops, which was our point. We went down accordingly into the waste and began to make our toilsome and devious travel towards the eastern verge. There were the tops of mountains all round, you are to remember, from whence we might be spied at any moment. So it behoved us to keep in the hollow parts of the moor, and when these turned aside from our direction, to move upon its naked face with infinite care. Sometimes, for half an hour together, we must crawl from one heather bush to another, as hunters do when they are hard upon the deer. It was a clear day again, with a blazing sun. The water in the brandy bottle was soon gone, and altogether, if I had guessed what it would be to crawl half the time upon my belly, and to walk much of the rest stooping nearly to the knees, I should certainly have held back from such a killing enterprise. Toiling and resting and toiling again, we wore away the morning, and about noon lay down in a thick bush of heather to sleep. Alan took the first watch, and it seemed to me I had scarce closed my eyes before I was shaken up to take a second. We had no clock to go by, and Alan stuck a sprig of heath in the ground to serve instead, so that as soon as the shadow of the bush should fall so far to the east, I might know to rouse him. But I was by this time so weary that I could have slept 12 hours at a stretch. I had the taste of sleep in my throat. My joints slept even when my mind was waking. The hot smell of the heather and the drone of the wild bees were like possets to me, and every now and again I would give a jump and find I had been dozing. The last time I woke, I seemed to come back from further away, and thought the sun had taken a great start in the heavens. I looked at the sprig of heath, and at that I could have cried aloud, for I saw I had betrayed my trust. My head was nearly turned with fear and shame, and at what I saw, when I looked around me on the moor, my heart was like dying in my body. For sure enough, a body of horse soldiers had come down during my sleep, and were drawing near to us from the southeast, spread out in the shape of a fan, and riding their horses to and fro in the deep parts of the heather. When I waked Alan, he glanced first at the soldiers, then at the mark and the position of the sun, and knitted his brows with a sudden, quick look, both ugly and anxious, which was all the reproach I had of him. "What are we to do now?" I asked. "We'll have to play at being hares," said he. "Do you see yon mountain?" pointing to the one on the northeastern sky. "Aye," said I. "Well then," says he, "let us strike for that. Its name is Ben Alder. It's a wild desert mountain full of hills and hollows, but if we can win to it before the morn, we may do yet." "But Alan," cried I. "That would take us across the very coming of the soldiers." "I ken that fine," said he, "but if we are driven back on Appin, we are two dead men. So now, David man, be brisk." With that, he began to run forward on his hands and knees with an incredible quickness, as though it were his natural way of going. All the time, too, he kept winding in and out in the lower parts of the moorland, where we were the best concealed. Some of these had been burned, or at least scathed with fire, and there rose in our faces, which were close to the ground, a blinding, choking dust as fine as smoke. The water was long out, and this posture of running on the hands and knees brings an overmastering weakness and weariness, so that the joints ache and the wrists faint under your weight. Now and then, indeed, where was a big bush of heather, we lay a while and panted, and putting aside the leaves, looked back at the dragoons. They had not spied us, for they held straight on, a half-troop, I think, covering about 2 miles of ground, and beating it mighty thoroughly as they went. I had awakened just in time, a little later, and we must have fled in front of them instead of escaping on one side. Even as it was, the least misfortune might betray us, and now and again, when a grouse rose out of the heather with a clap of wings, we lay as still as the dead and were afraid to breathe. The aching and faintness in my body, the labouring of my heart, the soreness of my hands, and the smarting of my throat and eyes in the continual smoke of dust and ashes, had soon grown to be so unbearable that I would gladly have given up. Nothing but the fear of Alan lent me enough of a false kind of courage to continue. As for himself, and you are to bear in mind that he was cumbered with a greatcoat, he had first turned crimson, but as time went on the redness began to be mingled with patches of white. His breath cried and whistled as it came, and his voice, when he whispered his observations in my ear during our halts, sounded like nothing human. Excuse me. Yet he seemed in no way dashed in spirits, nor did he at all abate in his activity, so that I was driven to marvel at the man's endurance. At length, in the first gloaming of the night, we heard a trumpet sound, and looking back from among the heather, saw the troop beginning to collect. A little after, they had built a fire and camped for the night about the middle of the waste. At this I begged and besought that we might lie down and sleep. "There shall be no sleep tonight," said Alan. "From now on, these weary dragoons of yours will keep the crown of the moorland, and none will get out of Appin but winged fowls. We got through in the nick of time, and shall we jeopard what we've gained? Nah, when the day comes, it shall find you and me in the fast place on Ben Alder." "Alan," I said, "it's not the want of will, it's the strength that I want. If I could, I would, but as sure as I'm alive, I cannot." "Very well then," said Alan. "I'll carry ye." I looked to see if he were jesting, but no, the little man was in dead earnest, and the sight of so much resolution shamed me. "Lead away," said I. "I'll follow." He gave me one look, as much as to say, "Well done, David," and off he set again at his top speed. It grew cooler and even a little darker, but not much, with the coming of the night. The sky was cloudless. It was still early in July and pretty far north. In the darkest part of that night you would have needed pretty good eyes to read, but for all that, I have often seen it darker in a winter midday. Heavy dew fell and drenched the moor like rain, and this refreshed me for a while. When we stopped to breathe, and I had time to see all about me, the clearness and sweetness of the night, the shapes of the hills like things asleep, and the fire dwindling away behind us like a bright spot in the midst of the moor, anger would come upon me in a clap that I must still drag myself in agony and eat the dust like a worm. By what I have read in books, I think few that have held a pen were ever really wearied, or they would write of it more strongly. I had no care of my life, neither past nor future, and I scarce remembered there was such a lad as David Balfour. I did not think of myself, but just of each fresh step which I was sure would be my last with despair, and of Alan, who was the cause of it, with hatred. Alan was in the right trade as a soldier. This is the officer's part, to make men continue to do things they know not wherefore, and when, if the choice was offered, they would lie down where they were and be killed. And I dare say I would have made a good enough private, for in these last hours it never occurred to me that I had any choice but just to obey as long as I was able, and die obeying. Day began to come in after years, I thought, and by that time we were past the greatest danger, and could walk upon our feet like men, instead of crawling like brutes. But, dear heart have mercy, what a pair we must have made, going double like old grandfathers, stumbling like babes, and as white as dead folk. Never a word passed between us. Each set his mouth and kept his eyes in front of him, and lifted up his foot and set it down again, like people lifting weights at a country play. All the while, with the moorfowl crying peep in the heather, and the light coming slowly clearer in the east. I say Alan did as I did. Not that ever I looked at him, for I had enough ado to keep my feet, but because it is plain he must have been as stupid with weariness as myself, and looked as little where we were going, or we should not have walked into an ambush like blind men. It fell in this way. We were going down a heathery brae, Alan leading and I following a pace or two behind, like a fiddler and his wife, when upon a sudden the heather gave a rustle, 3 or 4 ragged men leaped out, and the next moment we were lying on our backs, each with a dirk at his throat. I don't think I cared. The pain of this rough handling was quite swallowed up by the pains of which I was already full, and I was too glad to have stopped walking to mind about a dirk. I lay looking up in the face of the man that held me, and I mind his face was black with the sun and his eyes very light, but I was not afraid of him. I heard Alan and another whispering in Gaelic, and what they said was all one to me. Then the dirks were put up, our weapons were taken away, and we were set face to face, sitting in the heather. "They're Clooney's men," said Alan. "We couldn't have fallen better. We're just to bide here while these, which are his out sentries, We're just to bide here with these, which are his out sentries, till they can get word to the chief of my arrival." Now, Clooney Macpherson, the chief of the clan Vorich, had been one of the leaders of the great rebellion 6 years before. There was a price on his life, and I had supposed him long ago in France with the rest of the heads of that desperate party. Even tired as I was, the surprise of what I heard half wakened me. "What?" I cried. "Is Clooney still here?" "Aye, is he so?" said Alan. "Still in his own country and kept by his own clan. King George can do no more." I think I would have asked farther, but Alan gave me the put-off. "I'm rather wearied," he said, "and I would like fine to get to sleep." And without more words, he rolled on his face in a deep heather bush and seemed to sleep at once. There was no such thing possible for me. You have heard grasshoppers whirring in the grass in the summer-time? Well, I had no sooner closed my eyes than my body, and above all my head, belly, and wrists, seemed to be filled with whirring grasshoppers, and I must open my eyes again at once, and tumble, and toss, and sit up, and lie down, and look at the sky which dazzled me, or at Clooney's wild and dirty sentries, peering out over the top of the brae and chattering to each other in the Gaelic. That was all the rest I had, until the messenger returned, when, as it appeared that Clooney would be glad to receive us, we must get once more upon our feet and set forward. Alan was in excellent good spirits, much refreshed by his sleep, very hungry, and looking pleasantly forward to a dram and a dish of hot collops, for which, it seemed, the messenger had brought him word. For my part, it made me sick to hear of eating. I had been dead heavy before, and now I felt a kind of dreadful lightness which would not suffer me to walk. I drifted like a gossamer. The ground seemed to me a cloud, the hills a feather weight, the air to have a current like a running burn which carried me to and fro. With all that, a sort of horror of despair sat on my mind, so that I could have wept at my own helplessness. I saw Alan knitting his brows at me, and supposed it was in anger, and that gave me a pang of light-headed fear, like what a child may have. I remember, too, that I was smiling, and could not stop smiling, hard as I tried, for I thought it was out of place at such a time. But my good companion had nothing in his mind but kindness, and the next moment 2 of the gillies had me by the arms, and I began to be carried forward with great swiftness, or so it appeared to me, although I dare say it was slowly enough in truth, through a labyrinth of dreary glens and hollows, and into the heart of that dismal mountain of Ben Alder. And that's the end of the chapter, and where we're going to take a break. So, I'm going to go get a tea, which may be a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but I'm still going to stick a 5-minute timer up. So you know what to do. Go get a break, stretch the limbs you've got. I imagine after that, I don't know, maybe you're feeling a similar tiredness in the limbs. I sure am. And I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. Cycle the fluids and everything else. All the usual drill. See you back here in a bit, friends. Bye for now. I'm back. Hello. Welcome back to me and to you. Hope everyone's had a good and worthwhile break. I think it's because I sat and talked for so... I guess I did start a little bit late as well, but I feel like it took a lot longer on that first half than I expected. But, in theory, we get through the next bit, next 20 pages, that should just leave us about one stream from the end of the book. So, you know, thanks, Prod. It's nice to be back. Yeah, I made myself a tea, so that took a little bit longer as well. Everything just takes a little bit longer when you're tired, doesn't it? So, how's this go? It's not been in the water for too long, but also, I realise I'm probably actually going to struggle to drink this whilst reading, but hey, you know what? I'm just going to leave it for a minute so that you don't get too many just egregious slurping sounds down the microphone. Nobody wants to hear hot tea being slurped. But yeah, we're back. I've had no, I will not chug the tea. I had a message from my mum to say that she is listening in from the hospital. So, you know, shout out to my mum. Thank you for listening in. I'm happy that you're spending your evening with us. And she has also said that my Scottish accent isn't bad. So I'll take that as well. I don't know if she's reading chat, but Mum, if you're not reading chat, chat's saying hello to you. So yeah. Anyway, it's 10:30, so we should probably just bang on with the rest of the story. Get through this evening, rather than let it get even later. So, if we're all ready, sitting comfortably and reassembled after the break, because sometimes a rapid, unscheduled, or scheduled disassembly can happen, and it's good to put yourself back together again afterwards. Let us continue. I'll change the link actually at the top of the chat, because it is chapter 23. This will be helpful to anyone that will read along. So, whoa. Oh, hello, Mum. Showing up there with the first time chat. Hi. Okay, right. Now I'm going to go. And, well, not go, but, you know, now I shall do the bad stream thing and stop engaging with chat. And, right. We all ready? We all good? Everything done? Everything settled? Let us continue with Chapter 23, Clooney's Cage. We came at last to the foot of an exceeding steep wood, which scrambled up a craggy hillside and was crowned by a naked precipice. "That's here," said one of the guides, and we struck uphill. The trees clung upon the slope like sailors on the shrouds of a ship, and their trunks were like the rounds of a ladder by which we mounted. Quite at the top, and just before the rocky face of the cliff sprang above the foliage, we found that strange house which was known in the country as Clooney's Cage. The trunks of several trees had been wattled across, the intervals strengthened with stakes, and the ground behind this barricade levelled up with earth to make the floor. A tree, which grew out from the hillside, was the living centre beam of the roof. The walls were of wattle and covered with moss. The whole house had something of an egg shape, and it half hung, half stood in that steep hillside thicket, like a wasp's nest in a green hawthorn. Within, it was large enough to shelter 5 or 6 persons with some comfort. A projection of the cliff had been cunningly employed to be the fireplace, and the smoke rising against the face of the rock, and being not dissimilar in colour, readily escapes notice from below. This was but one of Clooney's hiding places. He had caves besides, and underground chambers in several parts of his country. And following the reports of his scouts, he moved from one to another as the soldiers drew near or moved away. By this manner of living, and thanks to the affection of his clan, he had not only stayed all this time in safety, while so many others had fled or been taken and slain, but stayed 4 or 5 years longer, and only went to France at last by the express command of his master. There he soon died, but it is strange to reflect that he may have regretted his cage upon Ben Alder. When we came to the door, he was seated by his rock chimney, watching a gilly about some cookery. He was mighty plainly habited, with a knitted nightcap drawn over his ears, and smoked a foul cutty pipe. For all that, he had the manners of a king, and it was quite a sight to see him rise out of his place to welcome us. "Well, Mr. Stewart, come away, sir," said he. "I'm bringing you a friend that as yet I dinna ken the name of." "And who is yourself, Cluny?" said Allan. "I hope you do brawly, sir, and I am proud to see you, and to present to ye my friend, the Laird of Shaws, Mr. David Balfour." Allan never referred to my estate without a touch of a sneer when we were alone, but with strangers he rang the words out like a herald. "Step in by the both of ye, gentlemen," says Cluny. "I make ye welcome to my house, which is a queer, rude place for certain, but one where I have entertained a royal personage, Mr. Stewart. Ye doubtless ken the personage I have in my eye. We'll take a dram for luck, and as soon as this handless man of mine has the collops ready, we'll dine and take a hand at the carts as gentlemen should. My life is a bit dry," says he, pouring out the brandy. "I see little company, and sit and twirl my thumbs, and mind upon a great day that is gone by, and weary for another great day that we all hope will be upon the road. And so here's a toast to ye. The Restoration." Thereupon we all touched glasses and drank. I am sure I wished no ill to King George, and if he had been there himself in proper person, it's like he would have done as I did. No sooner had I taken out the dram than I felt hugely better, and could look on and listen, still a little mistily perhaps, but no longer with the same groundless horror and distress of mind. It was certainly a strange place, and we had a strange host. In his long hiding, Cluny had grown to have all manner of precise habits, like those of an old maid. He had a particular place where no one else must sit. The cage was arranged in a particular way which none must disturb. Cookery was one of his chief fancies, and even while he was greeting us he kept an eye to the collops. It appears he sometimes visited or received visits from his wife and 1 or 2 of his nearest friends under the cover of night, but for the more part lived quite alone and communicated only with his sentinels and the gillies that waited on him in the cage. The first thing in the morning, one of them, who was a barber, came and shaved him and gave him the news of the country, of which he was immoderately greedy. There was no end to his questions. He put them as earnestly as a child, and at some of the answers laughed out of all bounds of reason, and would break out again laughing at the mere memory, hours after the barber was gone. To be sure, there might have been a purpose in his questions. Although he was thus sequestered, and like the other landed gentlemen of Scotland, stripped by the late Act of Parliament of legal powers, he still exercised a patriarchal justice in his clan. Disputes were brought to him in his hiding-hole to be decided, and the men of his country, who would have snapped their fingers at the court of session, laid aside revenge and paid down money at the bare word of this forfeited and hunted outlaw. When he was angered, which was often enough, he gave his commands and breathed threats of punishment like any king, and his gillies trembled and crouched away from him like children before a hasty father. With each of them, as he entered, he ceremoniously shook hands, both parties touching their bonnets at the same time in a military manner. Altogether, I had a fair chance to see some of the inner workings of a Highland clan, and this with a proscribed fugitive chief. His country conquered, the troops riding upon all sides in quest of him, sometimes within a mile of where he lay, and when the least of the ragged fellows whom he rated and threatened could have made a fortune by betraying him. On that first day, as soon as the collops were ready, Clooney gave them with his own hand a squeeze of a lemon, for he was well supplied with luxuries, and bade us draw in to our meal. "They," said he, meaning the collops, "are such as I gave His Royal Highness in his very house," beating the lemon juice, for at that time we were glad to get the meat and never fashed for kitchen. Indeed, there were made dragoons and lemons in my country in the year 46. I do not know if the collops were truly very good, but my heart rose against the sight of eating them, and I could eat but little. All the while, Clooney entertained us with stories of Prince Charlie's stay in the cage, giving us the very words of the speakers, and rising from his place to show us where they stood. By these, I gathered the prince was a gracious, spirited boy, like the son of a race of polite kings, but not so wise as Solomon. I gathered, too, that while he was in the cage he was often drunk, so the fault that has since, by all accounts, made such a wreck of him, even then had begun to show itself. We were no sooner done eating than Clooney brought out an old, thumbed, greasy pack of cards, such as you may find in a mean inn, and his eyes brightened in his face as he proposed that we should fall to playing. Now, this was one of the things I had been brought up to eschew like disgrace, it being held by my father neither the part of a Christian nor yet of a gentleman to set his own livelihood and fish for that of others on the cast of painted pasteboard. To be sure, I might have pleaded my fatigue, which was excuse enough, but I thought it behoved that I should bear a testimony. I must have got very red in the face, but I spoke steadily, and told them I had no call to be a judge for others, but for my own part it was a matter in which I had no clearness. Clooney stopped mingling the cards. "What in deal's name is this?" says he. "What kind of Whiggish, canting talk is this for the house of Clooney Macpherson?" "I will put my hand in the fire for Mr. Balfour," says Allen. "He is an honest and a metal gentleman, and I would have ye bear in mind who says it. I bear the king's name," says he, cocking his hat, "and I and any friend that I call friend, are company for the best. But the gentleman is tired and should sleep. If he has no mind to the cards, it will never hinder you and me, and I'm fit and willing, sir, to play any game that you can name." "Sir," says Clooney, "and this poor house of mine I would have you ken that any gentleman that may follow his pleasure. If your friend would like to stand on his head, he is welcome, and if either he or you or any other man is not precisely satisfied, I will be proud to step outside with him." I had no will that these two friends should cut their throats for my sake. "Sir," said I am very wearied, as Allen says, and what's more, as you are a man that likely has sons of your own, I may tell you it was a promise to my father." Say nae mair, said Clooney, and pointed me to a bed of heather in a corner of the cage. For all that, he was displeased enough, looked at me askance, and grumbled when he looked. And indeed it must be owned that both my scruples and the words in which I declared them smacked somewhat of the Covenanter, and were little in their place among wild Highland Jacobites. What with the brandy and the venison, a strange heaviness had come over me, and I had scarce lain down upon the bed before I fell into a kind of trance, in which I continued almost the whole time of our stay in the cage. Sometimes I was broad awake and understood what passed. Sometimes I only heard voices or men snoring, like the voices of a silly river, and the plaids upon the wall dwindled down and swelled out again, like firelight shadows on the roof. I must sometimes have spoken or cried out, for I remember I was now and then amazed at being answered. Yet I was conscious of no particular nightmare, only of a general, black, abiding horror, a horror of the place I was in, and the bed I lay in, and the plaids on the wall, and the voices, and the fire, and myself. The barber gilly, who was a doctor too, was called in to prescribe for me. But as he spoke in the Gaelic, I understood not a word of his opinion, and was too sick even to ask for a translation. I knew well enough I was ill, and that was all I cared about. I paid little heed while I lay in this poor pass, but Alan and Clooney were most of the time at the cards, and I am clear that Alan must have begun by winning, for I remember sitting up and seeing them hard at it, and a great glittering pile of as much as 60 or 100 guineas on the table. It looked strange enough to see all this wealth in a nest upon a cliffside, wattled about growing trees. And even then, I thought it seemed deep water for Alan to be riding, who had no better battle horse than a green purse and a matter of £5. The luck, it seems, changed on the second day. About noon, I was wakened as usual for dinner, and as usual refused to eat, and was given a dram with some bitter infusion which the barber had prescribed. The sun was shining in at the open door of the cage, and this dazzled and offended me. Clooney sat at the table, biting the pack of cards. Alan had stooped over the bed, and had his face close to my eyes, to which, troubled as they were with the fever, it seemed of the most shocking bigness. He asked me for a loan of my money. "What for?" said I. "Oh, just for a loan," said he. "But why?" I repeated. "I don't see." "Ah, David," said Alan, "you wouldn't grudge me a loan." I would, though, if I had had my senses. But all I thought of then was to get his face away, and I handed him my money. On the morning of the third day, when we had been 48 hours in the cage, I awoke with a great relief of spirits, very weak and very wearied, but seeing things of the right size and with their honest everyday appearance. I had a mind to eat, moreover, rose from bed of my own movement, and as soon as we had breakfasted, stepped to the entry of the cage and sat down outside in the top of the wood. It was a grey day, with a cool, mild air, and I sat in a dream all morning, only disturbed by the passing by of Clooney's scouts and servants coming with provisions and reports. For as the coast was at that time clear, you might almost say he held court openly. When I returned, he and Alan had laid the cards aside and were questioning a gillie, and the chief turned about and spoke to me in the Gaelic. "I have no Gaelic, sir," said I. Now, since the card question, everything I said or did had the power of annoying Clooney. "Your name has more sense than yourself then," said he angrily. "Well, it's good Gaelic, but the point is this. My scout report's all clear in the south, and the question is, have you the strength to go?" I saw cards on the table, but no gold, only a heap of little written papers, and these all on Clooney's side. Alan, besides, had an odd look, like a man not very well content, and I began to have a strong misgiving. "I do not know if I am as well as I should be," said I, looking at Alan, "but the little money we have has a long way to carry us." Alan took his underlip into his mouth and looked upon the ground. "David," says he at last, "I've lost it. That's the naked truth." "My money too," said I. "Your money too," said Alan, with a groan. "I shouldn't have given it to me. I'm daft when I get to the cards." "Hoot toot, hoot toot," said Clooney. "It was all daffing. It's all nonsense. Of course you'll have your money back again, and the double of it if you'll make so free with me. It would be a singular thing for me to keep it. It's not to be supposed that I would be any hindrance to a gentleman in your situation. That would be a singular thing, cries he, and began to pull gold out of his pocket with a mighty red face. Alan said nothing, only looked on the ground. Will you step to the door with me, sir? Said I. Clooney said he would be very glad, and followed me readily enough, but he looked flustered and put out. And no, sir, says I must first acknowledge your generosity. Nonsensical nonsense, cries Clooney. Where's the generosity? This is just a most unfortunate affair. But what would you have me do? Boxed up in this beast-skip of a cage of mine, but just set my friends to the carts when I can get them. And if they lose, of course it's not to be supposed. And here he came to a pause. Yes, said I, if they lose you give them back their money, and if they win they carry away yours in their pouches. I said before I grant you generosity, but to me, sir, it's a very painful thing to be placed in this position. There was a little silence, in which Clooney seemed always as if he was about to speak, but said nothing. All the time he grew redder and redder in the face. I'm a young man, said I, and I ask your advice. Advise me as you would your son. My friend fairly lost his money, after having fairly gained a far greater sum of yours. Can I accept it back again? Would that be the right part for me to play? Whatever I do, you can see for yourself it must be hard upon a man of any pride. It's rather hard on me too, Mr. Balfour, said Clooney. And you give me very much the look of a man that has entrapped poor people into their hut. I wouldn't have my friends come to any house of mine to accept affronts. No, he cried with a sudden heat of anger. Not yet to give them. And so you see, sir, said I, there is something to be said upon my side, and this gambling is very poor employ for gentlefolks, but I am still waiting your opinion. I am sure if ever Clooney hated any man, it was David Balfour. He looked me all over with a warlike eye, and I saw the challenge at his lips. But either my youth disarmed him, or perhaps his own sense of justice. Certainly, it was a mortifying matter for all concerned, and not least for Clooney. The more credit that he took it as he did. Mr. Balfour, said he, I think you are too nice and covenanting, but for all that you have the spirit of a very pretty gentleman. Upon my honest word, you may take this money. It's what I would tell my son, and here's my hand along with it. Chapter 24. The Flight in the Heather. The Quarrel. Alan and I were put across Loch Ericht under a cloud of night, and went down its eastern shore to another hiding place near the head of Loch Rannoch, whither we were led by one of the gillies from the cage. This fellow carried all our luggage and Alan's greatcoat in the bargain, trotting along under the burthen, far less than the half of which used to weigh me to the ground, like a stout hill pony with a feather. Yet he was a man that, in plain contest, I could have broken on my knee. Doubtless, it was a great relief to walk disencumbered, and perhaps without that relief, and the consequent sense of liberty and lightness, I could not have walked at all. I was but new risen from a bed of sickness, and there was nothing in the state of our affairs to hearten me for much exertion. Travelling, as we did, over the most dismal deserts in Scotland, under a cloudy heaven, and with divided hearts among the travellers. For long we said nothing, marching alongside or one behind the other, each with a set countenance. I, angry and proud, and drawing what strength I had from these two violent and sinful feelings. Alan, angry and ashamed that he had lost my money, angry that I should take it so ill. The thought of a separation ran always the stronger in my mind, and the more I approved of it, the more ashamed I grew of my approval. It would be a fine, handsome, generous thing indeed for Alan to turn round and say to me, "Go, I am the most danger, and my company only increases yours." But for me to turn to the friend who certainly loved me and say to him, "You are in great danger, I am but in but little. Your friendship is a burden. Go take your risks and bear your hardships alone." No, that was impossible, and even to think of it privily to myself made my cheeks to burn. And yet Alan had behaved like a child, and, what is worse, a treacherous child. Wheedling my money from me while I lay half-conscious was scarce better than theft. And yet here he was trudging by my side without a penny to his name, and by what I could see quite blithe to sponge upon the money he had driven me to beg. True, I was ready to share it with him, but it made me rage to see him count upon my readiness. These were the two things uppermost in my mind, and I could open my mouth upon neither without black ungenerosity. So I did the next worst, and said nothing, nor so much as looked once at my companion, save with the tail of my eye. At last, upon the other side of Loch Ericht, going over a smooth, rushy place where the walking was easy, he could bear it no longer, and came close to me. "David," says he, "this is no way for two friends to take a small accident. I have to say that I'm sorry, and so that's said. And now if you have anything, you'd better say it." "Oh," says I have nothing." He seemed disconcerted, at which I was meanly pleased. "No," said he, with rather a trembling voice, "but when I say I was to blame—" "Why, of course you were to blame," said I coolly, "and you will bear me out that I have never reproached you." "Never," says he, "but you ken very well that you've done worse. Are we to part?" "You said so once before. I hate to say it again. There's hills and heather enough between here and the two seas, David, and I will own I'm no very keen to stay where I'm no wanted." This pierced me like a sword, and seemed to lay bare my private disloyalty. "Alan Breck," I cried, and then, "do you think I am one to turn my face? My whole conduct's there to give the lie to it. It's true I fell asleep upon the moor, but that was from weariness, and you do it wrong to cast it up to me." "Which is what I never did," said Alan. "But aside from that," I continued, "what have I done to you that should even me to dogs by such a supposition? I never yet failed a friend, and it's not likely I'll begin with you. There are things between us that I can never forget, even if you can." "I will only say this to you, David," said Alan very quietly, "that I have long been owing you my life, and now I owe you money. You should try to make that burden light for me." This ought to have touched me, and in a manner it did, but the wrong manner. I felt I was behaving badly, and was now not only angry with Alan, but angry with myself in the bargain, and it made me the more cruel. "You asked me to speak?" said I. "Well, then I will. You own yourself that you have done me a disservice. I have had to swallow an affront. I have never reproached you. I have never named the thing till you did. And now you blame me," cried I, "because I cannae laugh and sing as if I was glad to be affronted. The next thing will be that I'm to go down upon my knees and thank you for it. You should think more of others, Alan Breck. If you thought more of others, you would perhaps speak less about yourself, and when a friend that likes you very well has passed over an offence without a word, you would be blithe to let it lie instead of making it a stick to break his back with. By your own way of it, it was you that was to blame. Then it shouldn't be you to seek the quarrel." "Oh well," said Alan, "say nae mair." And we fell back into our former silence, and came to our journey's end, and supped, and lay down to sleep, without another word. The gillie put us across Loch Rannoch in the dusk of the next day, and gave us his opinion as to our best route. This was to get us up at once into the tops of the mountains, to go round by a circuit, turning the heads of Glenlyon, Glenlochay, and Glendochart, and come down upon the lowlands by Kippen and the upper waters of the Forth. Alan was little pleased with a route which led us through the country of his blood foes, the Glenorchy Campbells. He objected that by turning to the east we should come almost at once among the Athol Stewarts, a race of his own name and lineage, although following a different chief, and come besides by a far easier and swifter way to the place whither we were bound. But the Gilly, who was indeed the chief man of Cluny's scouts, had good reason to give him on all hands, naming the force of troops in every district, and alleging, finally, as well as I could understand, that we should nowhere be so little troubled as in the country of the Campbells. Alan gave way at last, but with only half a heart. "That's one of the dosiest countries in Scotland," said he. "There's naething there that I ken but heath and crews and Campbells. But I see that you're a man of some penetration, and be it as you please." We set forth, accordingly, by this itinerary, and for the best part of 3 nights travelled on eerie mountains and among the well-heads of wild rivers, often buried in mist, almost continually blown and rained upon, but not once cheered by any glimpse of sunshine. By day we lay and slept in the drenching heather. By night incessantly clambered upon breakneck hills and among rude crags. We often wandered. We were often so involved in fog that we must lie quiet till it lightened. A fire was never to be thought of. Our only food was drammach and a portion of cold meat that we had carried from the cage. And as for drink, heaven knows we had no want of water. This was a dreadful time, rendered the more dreadful by the gloom of the weather and the country. I was never warm. My teeth chattered in my head. I was troubled with a very sore throat, such as I had on the Isle. I had a painful stitch in my side which never left me, and when I slept in my wet bed, with the rain beating above and the mud oozing below me, it was to live over again in fancy the worst part of my adventures, to see the tower of Shaw's lit by lightning, Ransom carried below on the men's backs, Shuan dying on the roundhouse floor, or Colin Campbell grasping at the bosom of his coat. From such broken slumbers I would be aroused in the gloaming, to sit up in the same puddle where I had slept and sup cold drammach, the rain driving sharp in my face, or running down my back in icy trickles, the mist enfolding us like as in a gloomy chamber, or perhaps, if the wind blew, falling suddenly apart and showing us the gulf of some dark valley where the streams were crying aloud. The sound of an infinite number of rivers came up from all round. In this steady rain, the springs of every mountain were broken up. Every glen gushed water like a cistern. Every stream was in high spate, and had filled and overflowed its channel. During our night tramps, it was solemn to hear the voice of them below in the valleys, now booming like thunder, now with an angry cry. I could well understand the story of the water kelpie, that demon of the streams, who is fabled to keep wailing and roaring at the ford until the coming of the doomed traveller. Alan, I saw, believed it, or half believed it, and when the cry of the river rose more than usually sharp, I was little surprised, though of course I would still be shocked, to see him cross himself in the manner of the Catholics. During all these horrid wanderings we had no familiarity, scarcely even that of speech. The truth is that I was sickening for my grave, which is my best excuse. But besides that, I was of an unforgiving disposition from birth, slow to take offence, slower to forget it, and now incensed both against my companion and myself. For the best part of 2 days he was unweariedly kind, silent, indeed, but always ready to help, and always hoping, as I could very well see that my displeasure would blow by. For the same length of time I stayed in myself, nursing my anger, roughly refusing his services and passing him over with my eyes as if he had been a bush or a stone. The second night, or rather the peep of the third day, found us upon a very open hill, so that we could not follow our usual plan and lie down immediately to eat and sleep. Before we had reached a place of shelter, the grey had come pretty clear. Although it still rained, the clouds ran higher, and Alan, looking in my face, showed some marks of concern. "You'd better let me take your pack," said he, for perhaps the 9th time since we had parted from the scout beside Loch Rannoch. "I do very well, I thank you," said I, as cold as ice. Alan flushed darkly. "I'll not offer it again," he said. "I'm not a patient man, David." "I never said you were," said I, which was exactly the rude, silly speech of a boy of 10. Alan made no answer at the time, but his conduct answered for him. Henceforth, it is to be thought he quite forgave himself for the affair at Clooney's, cocked his hat again, walked jauntily, whistled airs, and looked at me upon one side with a provoking smile. The third night we were to pass through the western end of the country of Balquhidder. It came clear and cold, with a touch in the air like frost, and a northerly wind that blew the clouds away and made the stars bright. The streams were full, of course, and still made a great noise among the hills, but I observed that Alan thought no more upon the Kelpie, and was in high good spirits. As for me, the change of weather came too late. I had lain in the mire so long that, as the Bible has it, my very clothes abhorred me. I was dead weary, deadly sick, and full of pains and shiverings. The chill of the wind went through me, and the sound of it confused my ears. In this poor state, I had to bear from my companion something in the nature of a persecution. He spoke a good deal, and never without a taunt. Wig was the best name he had to give me. "Here," he would say, "here's a dub for you to jump, my Wiggy. I ken you're a fine jumper." And so on, all the time with a gibing voice and face. I knew it was my own doing and no one else's, but I was too miserable to repent. I felt I could drag myself but little farther. Pretty soon I must lie down and die on these wet mountains like a sheep or a fox, and my bones must whiten there like the bones of a beast. My head was light, perhaps, but I began to love the prospect. I began to glory in the thought of such a death, alone in the desert, with the wild eagles besieging my last moments. Alan would repent then, I thought. He would remember, when I was dead, how much he owed me, and the remembrance would be torture. So I went like a sick, silly, and bad-hearted schoolboy, beating my anger against a fellow man, when I would have been better on my knees crying on God for mercy. And at each of Alan's taunts I hugged myself. "Ah," thinks I to myself, "I've a better taunt in readiness. When I lie down and die, you will feel it like a buffet in your face. Ah, what a revenge! Ah, how you will regret your ingratitude and cruelty." All the while I was growing worse and worse. Once I had fallen, my legs simply doubling under me, and this had struck Alan for the moment. But I was afoot so briskly, and set off again with such a natural manner, that he soon forgot the incident. Flushes of heat went over me, and then spasms of shuddering. The stitch in my side was hardly bearable. At last I began to feel that I could trail myself no farther, and with that there came on me all at once the wish to have it out with Alan, let my anger blaze, and be done with my life in a more sudden manner. He had just called me Whig. I stopped. "Mr. Stewart," said I, in a voice that quivered like a fiddle string, You are older than I am, and should know your manners. Do you think it either very wise or very witty to cast my politics in my teeth? I thought, where folk differed, it was the part of gentlemen to differ civilly, and if I did not, I may tell you that I could find a better taunt than some of yours. Alan had stopped opposite to me, his hat cocked, his hands in his breeches pockets, his head a little on one side. He listened, smiling evilly, as I could see by the starlight. And when I had done, he began to whistle a Jacobite air. It was the air made in mockery of General Cope's defeat at Preston Pans. Hey, Johnny Cope, are you walking yet? And are your drums a-beating yet? And it came in my mind that Alan, on the day of that battle, had been engaged upon the royal side. "Why do you take that air, Mr. Stewart?" said I. "Is that to remind me that you have been beaten on both sides?" The air stopped on Alan's lips. "David," said he. "But it's time these manners ceased," I continued, "and I mean you shall henceforth speak civilly of my king and my good friends, the Campbells." "I am a Stewart," began Alan. "Oh," says I ken ye by a king's name. But you are to remember, since I have been in the Highlands, I have seen a good many of those that bear it, and the best I can say of them is this, that they would be none the worse of washing." "Do you know that you insult me?" said Alan, very low. "I am sorry for that," said I, "but I'm not done, and if you distaste the sermon, I doubt the pearly cue will please you as little. You have been chased in the field by the grown men of my party. It seems a poor kind of pleasure to outface a boy. Both the Campbells and the Whigs have beaten you. You have run before them like a hare. It behoves you to speak of them as of your betters." Alan stood quite still, the tails of his greatcoat clapping behind him in the wind. "This is a pity," he said at last. There are things said that cannot be passed over." "I never asked you to," said I. "I am as ready as yourself." "Ready?" said he. "Ready," I repeated. "I'm no blower and boaster like some that I could name. Come on!" And drawing my sword, I fell on guard as Alan himself had taught me. "David!" he cried. "Are you daft? I can't draw upon you, David. That's for murder." "That was your lookout when you insulted me," said I. "That's the truth," cried Alan, and he stood for a moment wringing his mouth in his hands like a man in sore perplexity. "That's the bare truth," he said, and drew his sword. But before I could touch his blade with mine, he had thrown it from him and fallen to the ground. Nah, he kept saying. Nah, I cannae. At this, the last of my anger oozed all out of me, and I found myself only sick and sorry and blank and wondering at myself. I would have given the world to take back what I had said. But a word once spoken, who can recapture it? I minded me of all Alan's kindness and courage in the past, how he had helped and cheered and borne with me in our evil days, and then recalled my own insults, and saw that I had lost for ever that doughty friend. At the same time, the sickness that hung upon me seemed to redouble, and the pang in my side was like a sword for sharpness. I thought I must have swooned where I stood. This is what gave me a thought. No apology could blot out what I had said. It was needless to think of one. None could cover the offence. But where an apology was vain, a mere cry for help might bring Alan back to my side. I put my pride away from me. "Alan," I said, "if you canna help me, I must just die here." He started up, sitting, and looked at me. "That's true," said I. "I'm by with it. Oh, let me get into the build of a house. I can die there easier." I had no need to pretend. Whether I chose or not, I spoke in a weeping voice that would have melted the heart of stone. "Can you walk?" asked Alan. "No," said I.
not without help. This last hour my legs have been fainting under me. I've a stitch in my side like a red-hot iron. I can't breathe right. If I die, you'll forgive me, Alan? In my heart, I like you fine, even when I was the angriest. Wheesht, man, cried Alan. Didn't say that. David, man, you can't. He shut his mouth upon a sob. Let me get my arm about you, he continued. That's the way. Now lean upon me hard. Good kens where there's a house. We're in Ballhead Hood too. There should be no want of houses. No friends. Houses here. Do you gang easier so, Davy? Aye, said I. I can be doing this way. And I pressed his arm with my hand. Again he came near sobbing. Davy, said he, I'm no right man at all. I have neither sense nor kindness. I couldn't remember you were just a bairn. I couldn't see you were dying on your feet. Davy, you'll have to try and forgive me. Oh, man, let's say no more about it, said I. We're neither one of us meant to mend the other. That's the truth. We must just bear and forbear it, man, Alan. Oh, but my stitch is sore. Is there any house? I'll find a house to you, David, he said stoutly. We'll follow down the burn where there's bound to be houses. My poor man, will you no be better on my back? Oh, Alan, says I, and me a good 12 inches taller. There's no such thing, cried Alan with a start. It may be a trifling matter of an inch or two. I'm not saying I'm just exactly what you would call a tall man, whatever. And I dare say, he added, his voice tailing off in a laughable manner, now that I come to think of it, I dare say you'd be just about right. I'll be a foot or near hand, or maybe even more. It was sweet and laughable to hear Alan eat his words up in the fear of some fresh quarrel. I could have laughed, had not my stitch caught me so hard, but if I had laughed, I think I must have wept too. Alan, cried I, what makes you so good to me? What makes you care for such a thankless fellow? Deed, and I don't know, said Alan, and just precisely what I thought I liked about you was that you never quarrelled, and now I like you better. And that brings us to the end of the chapter and where we shall finish for tonight. So thank you for listening. And thank you to the anonymous gifter who wished to remain anonymous, if I'm to infer correctly from what I see in chat, for gifting anonymously a sub to Dave. Very kind of you. Much appreciated. And Dave, thank you for lurking. You got called out. You got rumbled. But yeah, that's the end of the stream. That's where we're going to stop. I did turn a corner of a page at one point because there was a bit that I liked and I just want to go back and review what it was. Oh yeah, I did appreciate I don't think it's going to be like some exactly Billion wet men in peril. What more could you like in the Scottish Highlands? It's perfect. Or I did see you drop in with a lurk. So yeah, it's lovely to see you. I hope you're doing well, and you're welcome, Mum. My voice is well. I mean, I can neither confirm nor deny calming, but certainly it's got a little bit of an extra bass to it because of the extremely long stream that I did on Thursday night. Turns out 11.5 hours of straight up talking into a microphone will in fact leave your voice rather haggard for a few days afterwards. No, you're welcome. Yeah. I was at the last minute a little bit uncertain about streaming tonight, but I'm glad that I did. It's been nice. Yeah, I did find it funny that it's like at the start of the argument they sort of it kicks off and you know Alan can see that David's clearly upset about something and it sort of blows up and they kind of have a little bit of a set to as you know they sling sort of insults at each other, and then immediately it's like it just reminds you that there's the Gilly who's like one of Clooney's servants has been there the whole time, and they just had this whole like blow-up argument in front of him. But all that happens, and there's no mention of him being there at all. And then it's just like, yeah, we fell back to our former silence and came to our journey's end, and supped and lay down to sleep without another word. The Gilly put us across Loch Rannoch, so they've just been stood there the whole time, as is like really awkwardly, as these
two friends just like bicker and, you know, shout at each other and stuff. And it's like, okay. Anyway, shall we continue? Good, right. And just the real fun, like, third wheel energy going on there is great. But yeah, it's 11:20. So, yeah, guys just stand there idly gazing off into space like, you done yet? Can we... There's guys in red coats on horses coming up that hill. If we could just... Servants are just walking furniture. Yes, exactly. Which, yeah, that's probably more the intention with which it's written. It's just like, these two are primary characters, so therefore, you know, they're doing their bit, they're active and involved. This other person, the servant, just a guy. Doesn't matter. Just luggage. Capital L. Pratchett in the house. Just an NPC, exactly, yes. But yes, good night to everyone that is leaving. I'm not going to raid over anywhere. I cannot be doing that tonight. So we're just going to park the stream here. So yeah, thank you all. In theory, what is it? It is Saturday. Lucy and I should be actually back on Monday showing our faces for Chilliteracy, where we'll be talking about things. She'll probably be talking quite either tiredly or enthusiastically, depending on where the energy levels are, about what she's been doing this week. I have nothing in mind or prepared at any point, but especially for that. So we'll see what happens, and then we'll be playing some video games afterwards. So yeah, you can catch us there next. But for now, or over on Dave's channel, actually, tomorrow, possibly playing something. I'm not sure what we decided on yet, but it'll probably be something over there. But for now, I'm going to go. So thank you all for being here. Take care. Recover if you are from at least one of the audience who's recovering in a hospital. But, you know, any other form of recovery that you need, go do it. Have a good rest of the weekend, and I will see you next time. Goodbye and good night.